Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. To those of you outside of London, British punctuality at its best, 7 minutes past 2. Okay, we've got a great lineup for you again this afternoon, and a lot of very, very different stories, individual stories, and stories about sports and their relationship with sports marketing. Our next guest was the British 400 metres champion in 2007. In 2008, he was part of the 4x400 metre relay team which came fourth at the Olympics in Beijing. At that stage, everything in Andrew Steele's career was going in exactly the right direction. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out like so many of the candy floss stories, Hollywood style, of sport and sportsmen that we hear from time to time. Ladies and gentlemen, to talk about a very different career in sport and its impact on sports marketing, would you please welcome Andrew Steele? Whichever one you like. You can go as far away from me as you like.
I'm going to come nice and close, make sure.
Okay, cool. It must have been wonderful, Beijing, and participating in that final. What are your major memories of that particular event?
Well, Beijing was my first Olympics, and obviously the biggest competition there is in sport in general. And before it, I didn't really know what to expect. There's a lot of hyperbole used with the Olympics, and I'd already competed in the World Championships in athletics, which is the same standard of competition. But what really struck me about the Olympics was the magnitude of the occasion. It's something very different. It's such an important historical event. You can almost feel the history just seeping through every part of it when you're there, and the occasion is just much larger than anything I'd ever experienced. Rather than the crowds only turning up for the final events in the evening each day, from 9 AM in the morning, there was 90,000 people there, and the village is like some sort of bizarre utopia of a city where there's the highest, the tallest, the smallest, the widest, the fastest, so the strongest. There's every kind of the most extreme examples of human society walking around just doing their daily business there, and it's quite an interesting leveller as well, as in Roger Federer's just sat on the bench eating in the dining hall next to a table tennis player from Papua New Guinea. I don't know, it's a very interesting occasion, and it really is such an important event, because regardless of the level of competition, it has this magnitude, and it was such a great experience to run there. And obviously my experience of the Olympics was that in my heat in the individual event, the 400 metres, I ran a new personal best, which is great to go with the big occasion and run well, of 44.94 seconds, which generally in international 400 metre running is considered a benchmark of sort of world class. Yes. And anything under 45 seconds, you've always got a chance of winning a medal. So I did that in my individual event in the heat. Semi-final, I think, we were quite as well. In the relay, we came fourth. So Matthew Pinson once said that's the worst place to finish. The reality is that rather than the cliche, it really is, because we were just smidgens of a second away from being Olympic medalists. Mm-hmm. But of course, at that time, like you mentioned, I was fairly young. I was 23 at the time and up and coming. And we were very frustrated and disappointed to miss out on the medal, but I saw it as a launch pad for further greatness, and going on to looking ahead and thinking, yep, the next 4 years now, I'm definitely committed. I've got 4 years of training. London 2012, that's it. We can win there. We can get the medal there. In the individual, I can get a medal. And they all seemed very, very positive at the time.
Okay, so for those, what exactly happened?
Well, Before I go, I must state that the journey's not over yet. It's been addressed as though I've retired and given up, which isn't the case.
You were in the trials, weren't you? Because you wrote about the Olympic trials.
So after Beijing, I was filled with a lot of positivity about where my career was going to go, and the standard sort of story of an up-and-coming sportsman. First championships, did relatively well. Next one is where you capitalise. Then unfortunately 2009 I missed the entire season due to an injury, which is par for the course in sports. That happens sometimes. Had no problem with that. That's okay. I've got optimism and I've got a bright future. I'll sit out 2009. 2010 I'll really announce my presence on the international scene, and I'll be a star, and I'll be, you know, I'll be the first sort of British 400 metre runner since Roger Black to do back-to-back seasons of being really well and so on. But it didn't quite work out that way. I came down with glandular fever, Epstein-Barr virus, in 2010, just after a very long 9 months winter training where I was in incredible shape, and that stole my season away from me in 2010.
Okay, for those of us who don't know, can you just explain a little bit about Epstein-Barr virus and what the impact that has?
Okay, well, you may have heard of it. It's very common in sort of students when they go to uni and they come down with this virus, and it just makes them very, very tired. Your body really sort of shuts down. You become incredibly fatigued at just the slightest bit of exercise, and it can affect you very badly psychologically, muscularly, really tight muscle twitches, nervous system's very, very sensitive, and like some very tricky, ambiguous psychological problems to do with memory loss and concentration loss and so on. So it can be difficult anyway if you're just at uni, let alone trying to run 400 metres in under 45 seconds and train at the top level. So it's not ideal, as you can imagine. So that came down, that struck me, and interestingly, I mentioned Roger Black before as our sort of most well-known 400 metre runner in the UK, and he suffered the same thing 2 years before the Athens Olympics, where he won his Olympic medal behind Michael Johnson. So it's a very, very tricky thing to get over, and medicine really doesn't know what it's doing as regards. They just say rest, and that's obviously not ideal when you're trying to make a living as a sportsman. So there's a lot of implications to do with not being able to run fast, but also not being able to make a living or carry on training, as it were.
So you found yourself in a situation where what was a promising career had pretty much stalled.
Yeah.
Yet you haven't entirely given. You see, you were at the trials in Birmingham, I think it was, for the Olympic Games. What sort of experience, from a personal point of view, was that? Because they kind of didn't go that well.
No. So yeah, it was the World Championship trials this year. The World Championship Athletics have just taken place in Daegu, in South Korea. Now, I've been able to run fairly decent times, as it would say. I'm able to compete and make the final of the national championships and the trials, and just about qualify for the relay team. So, and that's a good sign to me, is when things haven't gone well, I can still do that. But the reason I'm sort of like telling this story, and this came about because I wrote an article for BBC Sport online, which garnered a really unexpectedly large response. And part of it was just me telling my story from a cathartic point of view, so people understood, you know, what had happened. But more interestingly, I wanted to point out the other side of the sporting story, where we often hear about how difficult it was training from Olympic gold medalists or from world championships in any sport. Those with the glory always say, yes, it was a very, very, very hard training, but it's always qualified with the phrase at the end, but it was all worth it. And I'm interested into, by default in sport, there's only 3 medalists, so there's only 1 winner. And what happened to all the others, the non-medalists, the non-finalists, even the non-qualifiers? Were they just not trying as hard? Did something external stop them? Were they just not good enough? Or, you know, were they perhaps couldn't carry on from a financial point of view anymore? And that's sort of one the side I wanted to highlight, telling the story, because it's I think it's very interesting, and if people know before the event, before it either succeeds or fails, then they can almost get behind it and understand what people go through to achieve what they want in sport, because it's such a difficult thing to do in all sports. And to really understand how big an achievement it is, it's important that the story of the process and maybe what can go wrong as well as what can go right is told.
Indeed. And what happened to you from the point of view of your funding and any sponsorships that you had in place? You said you had a year off with an injury that because you knew what it was. I guess it was slightly easier to cope with before the illness really hit in. How long did your lottery funding continue?
Well, it's I'm still a lottery funded athlete as we speak, and that each year is either renewed or not renewed at the end of October. So it's a yearly process, and you obviously have grace years if things go wrong. But as an athlete in athletics, as I know in my experience, as income streams, you have sort of the backbone of your main income would be from the lottery funding, which people assume is quite a lot, and it really isn't. I'm a very, very big fan of the system. We have the best official athlete support system in the world, but as a result, it's public money, so as a result, it needs to be given through policy and no sort of personal decision making. It needs to be clear cut, and so that's always at risk if you don't do well. I've been in the situation where I was dropped off my funding in 2006 and I plateaued in my career a little bit. But luckily, thanks to a personal sponsor I was able to carry on. And the next year, I made a huge breakthrough and became British champion and British #1. So that's sort of the role that like a sponsorship plays, rather than just the backbone of your lottery funding and nothing else.
So we've got a room full of people here who are connected in one way or another to the world of sponsorship and sports marketing, either as brands, organisations which write the checks to sponsor sport and to sponsor athletes, or the agencies which should advise those people. And it seems to me, from your particular story, that they might be perhaps missing a trick by adopting a policy of really focusing on winners when they're winning.
Perhaps, yeah, and I think I've noticed from watching all the presentations today, there's been a theme of this soft power sort of sponsorship of, as we talk about the Olympics, it's a clean Olympics that I can't sell as an athlete, or no Olympic athlete can sell a space on the vest, on their singlet when they're competing, to truly just place the brand out there. Now, obviously, I'm not a sports business professional, but it seems that there can be a lot gained from seeing it as almost a personal, holistic exercise in supporting sports people through in this process to maybe achieve greatness. And an example I often think of is officially the world's most marketable sportsman, Usain Bolt, was a very, very, very good junior, and then he plateaued and he reached senior level, and Puma at that time could have dropped him from his contract. They could have cut him, because for 3 or 4 years Usain didn't really make any strides, and then in 2008 he became the world's greatest singular sportsman. And as soon as he finished the race, he took off his spikes and thrust 2 massive gold Puma logos into the camera of 1 billion people. And that was because they stood by him through those years, and they didn't have to. Jess Ennis was the same. She missed the 2008 Olympics through an injury. Adidas could have got rid of her then. Then in 2009, she became the face of the London Games. So if in this sort of philanthropic support, Rick mentioned earlier Home Depot letting athletes work for 2 days a week for 5 days a week pay or whatever. That's a support that can probably be garnered. It can get reward in not just tangible figures, but in a sort of philanthropic and personal satisfaction, as well as a marketing and professional view.
Yes. And I guess that can be at various levels as well. That there is a temptation, talking about sponsorship, to look at the big national stuff, the big international stuff. It's kind of sexy, but for individual athletes and providing that sort of developing that sort of holistic relationship between a brand or a company, am I right in thinking that can work very effectively on a local basis?
I would imagine so, yeah. I mean, I had a local sponsor in 2005, 2006 who supported me when the lottery funding was taken away, and I'm almost, you know, forever indebted to them. And so I think especially with the Olympic sports, we're not, you know, being paid 200 grand a week, and so we can just take or leave any sponsorship deals. When someone can help an Olympic sports person, they really, you know, they own a place in their heart, and if a medal is achieved at the end, then that's been bought and literally, you know, created by the company which supported. Mm-hmm. But on a local basis, you know, if you can be seen to be fueling sort of the desires of a lower level of sports people in the region, and one of those goes through, then you've played a role in creating a culture, not just an individual.
Mm. But I guess you, when you were going through the ranks, I haven't asked what your hometown is, yeah. But hometown media, etc., etc. You're a big fish in that local pond as well in terms of media coverage.
Yeah, definitely. I suffer a little bit being from Manchester. The footballers tend
a lot of people do
tend to steal a bit of the limelight. But so, you know, I can't really compete with the biggest sportsman in town. But I would imagine so. Yeah, if you're from somewhere, and the local media are obviously still a very big fan. Mm-hmm. The amount of athletes we churn from Manchester is quite small. So if you do well, then you're regularly in the local media, and in the local populace's consciousness as well, and that's obviously quite an important place for businesses to be. Mm-hmm.
And again, for this conference down the years, we're constantly learning about businesses' desire to get involved with sports people, sort of slightly beneath the surface. We used the word holistic earlier, to be able to talk, particularly across social media, new media, about their lives outside what they do professionally. Now you've got a sort of music thing going on as well. You're a fairly sort of multi-dimensional character. Tell us a little bit about that.
Personally, yeah, my brother is a professional musician, and that's sort of where part of my passion lays in music. I play piano, guitar, and drums, and I have a small music studio in Manchester with my brother, and we do that all sorts of stuff there. But the point really isn't just about me, what I do, but then sports people in general often have other aspects to their lives, and they're perhaps not encouraged to talk about them because, one, they're so well received that one particular role of their life, that to try and talk about something which they're not quantified as the very best in the world, that might be a bit of a pride at stake. And two, we constantly repress our emotions to deal with the nerves of competing at the top level. So when generally they're not very boastful creatures really in us, because we can just go and compete and show people how good we are at something. Mm-hmm. there. So I think as sponsors, like, there should be an emphasis on finding these personalities, because in my experience, a majority of the athletes have very interesting other sides to their characters, which are often just never shown, because when you do your interview with the BBC or whatever after your event, you've literally just finished your event and you're still out of breath and sweating and red-faced and feeling like you need to be sick, and then you've got to give your interview. So you can't really get across your intrinsic personality at that point. So that, as sponsors, I think there's a lot more to be found in sports people, and that's probably an important thing to look for.
Okay. And as an athlete, how much sort of assistance did you receive in helping to get those kind of messages across? I mean, you're sitting here today, sort of very articulate, very very confident, very focused with the messages. As you say, they can't always do that. Should there be somewhere along the line more support, not just for track and field athletes, but for young footballers and people from other sports as well, to help them to understand this industry and make themselves more useful to it?
Without a doubt, yeah. I've got a personal hatred of the sort of the standard footballer answer of just going, yeah, the governor told me to do this, so I did it, and then I went home. And I think, like, it's not generally been encouraged, and obviously it doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. Like, I personally have no issue, you know, telling people what I'm like. But as a result of sport, you often have to be quite robotic in the way you live. You know, we live very disciplined, very motivated, but ultimately dull lifestyles, unless maybe you're a footballer. But that should be encouraged, and perhaps if you were sponsoring a sports person, you know, it might be worth some form of media training, that sort of side of things, which isn't readily offered to us. It's not something that we go through as a standard. It just so happens if I were to seek out media training, I could have it. Sure. But it's not something that goes through, and so it's probably perhaps the role of the sports business side of things to encourage that in sports people.
Yeah, there are certainly benefits there. Now, to bring us up to date, how are things with your illness now?
Good. Yeah. Very well. I'm fine health-wise, and I'm about to start winter training on October the 2nd. In athletics, we train most of the year for one race of under 45 seconds. So I'll train from October through to May, and then we start competing on the international circuit around Europe and the world. But things are going very well. Looking forward to winter training, but the problem is, like I mentioned before, with the money you receive from the lottery funding, it's a year-on-year basis, and so you can never rely on it. And I think that's where commercial partners can come in providing some solidity, some sort of you know, fallback that you know you can carry on, and I'm not down to just my income, whether I can achieve what I need in sport.
Sure. And so you're into winter training. London 2012, which was the dream after Beijing, I guess, is not necessarily an option there. What are your personal goals now at this stage?
I'll correct you there and say definitely London 2012 is the absolute goal.
I do apologise.
Yeah, no. Basically, the times I've run while being unhealthy, very, very encouraging, and still put me up there. Now I'm healthy and have time to do a full winter's preparation. If I can just run anything under 45 seconds in the last few major championships, that would have won me a medal in the individual event, let alone in the relay. Mm-hmm. So we've got a very good group of 400 metre runners in the UK. We've got a proud history in the 4x400 metre relay in the UK as well. So if I can be at my best, the other runners can be close to their best. We've got a very, very good chance of a medal, a gold medal, let alone a silver or bronze in the relay. And in the individual, if I can run 44 seconds in the final, I've got a very good chance of an individual medal as well. So by all means, that's my goal. It hasn't changed.
Yes, that's right. It's the classic. I once managed to tell Oscar Pistorius to break a leg as he went on stage. That's in the same mould, really, I would have thought.
But you know, that shows just how difficult the process is. And like, you know, so if it does work out, then what a great story, you know, because people have thought, well, surely it can't possibly still be on the cards, but it is. So.
Yes, well, I'm glad you put everybody right. Now, before we take some questions for the audience then, and this may just be recapping what we've already talked about, is there one message that you'd like to leave these guys with at the end of this session?
Well, I'll just say I think I'm an Olympian, an Olympic sports person, so my bias leans towards this side of the non-monetary side of sport, as it were. We're not famous for making a lot of money, but it seems to me, especially with London just around the corner, London 2012, that the people that do these lesser sports, now I'm in track and field, which is obviously the blue ribbon of the Olympics, but the people that do these Olympic sports seem to live such lifestyles which are appropriate for branding, of incredible discipline and motivation, and very positive messages all through, and to encourage the populace as a whole to take up a sport. The Olympic Games is a great opportunity for that, and so as sponsorship and sports business goes, like to just continue to get behind these Olympic sports, not just now in the 9 months running up to London 2012, but for the following Olympics and so on, because the culture and the sort of the gain to the general populace seems to me such a positive move that it'd be a shame to miss out on.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Now let's take a couple of questions if we have them. There we are. There's a gentleman in the middle row here. Okay. in what is now the time-honored tradition, if you could just let everybody know who you are first, please.
Sure. My name is Matt O'Donnell, over from Germany by way of Atlanta, just as a freelancer here. So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the two big sort of Usain Bolt moments, whether it's the Olympics or Berlin. Mm-hmm. Do you think that athletics and maybe the brands involved did enough to sort of capitalize on those moments?
Well, I would certainly say Puma have capitalised on it as well as they could do. With Usain, I remember reading some research on the amount Adidas and Nike spent on their Beijing Olympic marketing, and then how much that referred to what Puma spent, and then what they gained was, you know, a different world. But I think Usain has raised the profile of the sport back to a level which I hadn't seen maybe ever, definitely not for a long time, and it'll be, you know, it's down to Usain what he does endorsement wise and so on, so whether there's been access there. But I think the good thing is that Usain has done so well. He's actually pulled through a lot of other athletes behind him, not just in his event, but they've created a new positivity and a new sort of likable marketing side to a lot of the athletes, because he got his personality across. So I'm not sure if there was truly enough done at the time, but hopefully his effect can be felt, and sponsors can see that Puma's marketing with Usain is not a very traditional thing. They almost focus more on his personality than his ability, you know. And I think that's the important message to take from that, is that the athletes often have another side to them which is more sellable than their actual performances.
Okay, do we have one more question from members of the audience? We certainly do.
Hi, Rod Kohler from Revolution Sports. Just a question on the funding. Just how stressful, I mean, you often hear about lottery funding and Sport UK and Sport England and all this different funding, and there always seems to be sort of issues about it. It's always a news type issue. From an athlete's point of view, and you must have your other colleagues doing in a sort of similar situation to you, doing different disciplines within track and field, just how stressful is that funding to you? Does it ever kind of seep down to you, or do you have a manager who deals with it and blocks all of that sort of stuff, or is it something which you personally and your other have to deal with? And get, you know, how are you able to kind of focus on achieving on the track when you've got these sort of funding issues continually swirling around?
The reality is it's a very stressful scenario, really. You as a sportsman, you're very good at blocking things out. So when it comes to competition, you do block it out, and it's not something hanging over your head. But I remember thinking to myself this year, just as I crossed the line in 7th at the national championships in the World Trials, going, hang on, what does this mean for me? You know, and that hadn't been an issue. That wasn't why I was running. That wasn't why I'm trying to achieve it, because you don't get into sport to make minimum wage. You know, that's not why you do it. You do it because we want to achieve greatness and win. And but then it is a stressful scenario, and I suppose when it comes down to being injured, being ill, and you think, well, ideally I might do this, but I have to try and do X, Y, Z over here just so I can make a living, in case that pulls off. But then you look back and think, well, maybe if I'd just known that, look, I've got this for this amount of time, a bit longer, I don't have to really chase that, and you would do yourself a lot of favours. You know, I perhaps, when I first got glandular fever, if I was in a financial sort of position to do so, I would have said, right, I'm going to take 3 months off, I'm going to go on holiday in the middle of the season, but I couldn't. I had to say, well, look, I need to maintain this level of funding, I need to try and win some races to earn some prize money, just to live and carry on in the sport. So the stress filters down from a sort of second-hand view there, and then obviously the reality of it when things haven't gone well really plays on your mind.
Okay, thank you for that question. I'm getting that signal, which means that it's time to move on. Again, we could have chatted for this about for ages, and I would have had you down as preparing for the next table tennis championship before the end of it. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today, and good luck with the winter training and for London 2012. It's been brilliant. Thank you.